There are some things lost that are never found, and there are some things found when it is already too late to be recognized. The rag doll lay in a puddle of mud at the corner of Main Street in Sweetwater, Wyoming. The fabric was stained brown and gray, stitched together from scraps that might have once been colorful, but were now faded to the dull tones of earth and ash. A hand reached down, thin fingers trembling with cold or hunger or both, lifted the doll from the mud and clutched it against a chest that rose and fell with shallow breaths. The hand belonged to a woman. She sat with her back pressed against the weathered boards of Cooper's general store, her knees drawn up, her body folded into itself like something trying to disappear. An old coat hung off her shoulders, too large for her frame, the fabric torn at the seams. Her hair fell forward in dark tangles, streaked with gray, hiding most of her face. She rocked forward, holding the doll the way a mother might hold an infant. The motion was rhythmic, almost hypnotic, as if the act of rocking itself was the only thing keeping her tethered to this world. The sky above Sweetwater was the hard blue of late summer, bright and unforgiving. The sun burned white at its zenith, turning the air into something you could almost taste, thick with dust and heat and the smell of horses and hay and human sweat. Main Street stretched out in a straight line, lined with buildings that leaned slightly, as if tired from standing too long. The livery stable, the blacksmith's forge, the saloon with its doors swung open to catch whatever breeze might wander through. The church at the far end, its white paint peeling its bell, silent in the afternoon stillness. 3 years earlier, another time, another place that was the same place but different. Night, rain falling in sheets so thick it was like standing under a waterfall. The Snake River, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains roaring past its banks, hungry and dark. A woman's voice cutting through the storm. Eleanor Ellie, Carter Harrison, stood at the edge of the water, his boots sinking into mud, his hat gone, his hair plastered to his skull. Rain ran down his face and into his eyes, but he did not blink. He stared at the river as if he could force it to give back what it had taken. Mama, Mama, behind him a child cried. Tommy, 4 years old, small and fragile, held by Jack Reeves, the ranch foreman, who had one arm wrapped around the boy to keep him from running toward the water. The child's face was streaked with tears and rain, his mouth open in a wail that was swallowed by the storm. Carter took a step forward. The river surged, black and furious, branches and debris spinning past in the current. Somewhere out there beyond the reach of his lantern's light was his wife, or what remained of her. A piece of blue fabric that caught on a branch downstream. Her shawl. He recognized it even in the darkness. Eleanor's shawl, the one she wore when the nights turned cold. He had searched for 2 weeks after that night, ridden every mile of riverbank from the ranch all the way down to the confluence 20 miles south, dragged the shallows with hooks and rope, asked every homesteader, every drifter, every soul between Carbon County and the territorial line if they had seen a woman dark-haired, average height, with a scar running from her temple to her cheek. No one had seen her. The river kept its secrets. Reverend Filler had stood beside Carter at the empty grave in Sweetwater Cemetery, his Bible open to a passage about dust and ashes, his voice soft with practiced sympathy. Sometimes Carter, the Reverend, that had said, the river does not give them back. You have to let her go. For your sake. For the boy's sake. Carter had let her go. He buried the memory along with the empty coffin. He stopped searching. He stopped hoping. He became a man made of stone, hard and cold and unyielding, running his ranch with the same ruthless efficiency he used to bury his grief. Every fence line checked, every dollar counted, every feeling locked away in a place so deep he could pretend it did not exist. And now, 3 years later, he stood in Sweetwater Cemetery again. Sunday morning, the anniversary of the day they had put an empty box into the ground and called it a funeral. The headstone was simple. Eleanor Harrison, beloved wife and mother, the dates carved into granite, the grass around it trimmed and neat because Carter paid a boy from town to keep it that way. Carter Harrison was 39 years old. He owned 5,000 acres of grazing land and 2,000 head of cattle. He employed 15 men and paid them fairly. He was called the richest cowboy in Carbon County, and no one said it as a compliment. Wealth in a land where most men scratched out their living from dirt and rock in endless labor bred resentment as much as respect. He stood before the grave with his hat in his hands, his black vest buttoned tight over a clean white shirt, his boots polished to a shine. His face was weathered from years under the Wyoming sun lines, carved deep around his eyes and mouth. He did not cry. He had not cried in 3 years. He simply stood silent and still, as if paying a debt. Beside him, Tommy stood with his shoulders hunched, his hands clutching a small, wooden horse carved from pine. The boy was 7 now, thin for his age, with brown hair that refused to lie flat no matter how much water Carter used to slick it down. Tommy did not look at the grave. He looked at the horizon, his eyes distant, as if he were searching for something no one else could see. "We should go," Carter said. His voice was flat, empty of inflection. "We have work waiting." Tommy nodded but did not move. Carter placed his hat back on his head and turned toward the road where their horses were tied. Behind him, the cemetery stretched out in neat rows, the dead lying beneath their stones. Silent witnesses to the living who came to remember and then to forget. The ride back to the ranch took less than an hour, but Carter did not go home. Instead, he turned his horse toward Sweatbostom. Sunday services would be ending soon, and it was expected that he attend. Not because he believed not anymore, but because appearances mattered. Because a man of his station was expected to show his face, to shake the reverend's hand, to nod politely to the townspeople who whispered behind his back. Tommy rode beside him in silence. The boy had learned not to ask questions, had learned that silence was safer than words, that his father preferred the quiet. They rode into Sweetwater as the church bells were ringing their final notes, the sound echoing off the storefronts and fading into the empty sky. People spilled out of the church in clusters, women in their Sunday dresses, men in clean shirts and suspenders, children running between the adults with the kind of energy that came from sitting still too long. Carter dismounted and tied his horse to the rail outside the church. He waited as the crowd thinned, as people glanced his way, and then looked away, as if acknowledging him required more effort than they were willing to give. Reverend Miller appeared at the church door, his white collar bright against his black coat. He was a man in his 60s, soft around the middle, with kind eyes and a voice that could fill the church without shouting. He smiled when he saw Carter and extended his hand. "Carter," he said, "good to see you." Carter shook the offered hand once briefly. "Reverend." "And young Thomas." The Reverend placed a hand on Tommy's head, and the boy flinched slightly before forcing himself to stand still. "Growing like a weed, aren't you?" Tommy nodded but said nothing. The Reverend's smile faltered. He glanced at Carter, then back at the boy, then sighed softly. "Well, God bless you both." Carter touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement and turned away. He walked down Main Street with Tommy at his side, boots hitting the dirt in steady rhythm. The town was waking up from its Sunday torpor. Harold McCoy sat on the porch of his general store whittling a piece of wood, his knife flashing in the sunlight. He lifted the blade in greeting as Carter passed. Carter touched his hat brim in return, but did not stop. The heat pressed down like a physical weight. Sweat gathered at the back of Carter's neck, soaking into his collar. He could feel the eyes on him, the weight of judgment and curiosity and pity that followed him everywhere in this town. He hated it. Hated the way people looked at Tommy, at the boy who had lost his mother and been left with a father who did not know how to be soft. They passed the livery stable, the blacksmith's forge, where the hammer rang against the anvil, even on the Lord's day. Women stood outside the bakery, talking in low voices, their words lost in the murmur of the Sunday afternoon. Carter heard his name spoken, heard Eleanor's name. He kept walking. Tommy slowed. Carter took 2 more steps before he realized the boy was no longer beside him. He turned to irritation, flashing hot and quick. "Tommy." The boy stood planted in the dirt, staring toward the far end of the street where the boardwalk ended and the buildings gave way to open ground. His small fingers gripped the wooden horse so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "Come on," Carter said, his voice harder now. "We have work waiting." Tommy did not move. "Boy," Carter's tone carried a warning. Tommy turned his head slowly and looked up at his father. His eyes were wide, dark, filled with something Carter could not name. When the boy spoke, his voice was quiet but certain. Calm in a way that no 7-year-old child should be calm. "Father," Tommy said, "that's Ma." The street seemed to go silent. The wind, which had been kicking up dust devils in the road, suddenly stilled. The murmur of voices faded to nothing. Even the ringing of the blacksmith's hammer paused, as if the whole world had taken a breath and held it. Carter's chest tightened. His heart, which had been beating steady and strong, stumbled. He stared at his son, at the small boy who had just spoken words that made no sense, that could not be real. "What did you say?" Tommy lifted his arm and pointed. His finger was steady, unwavering. "That's Ma." Carter followed the line of his son's hand. His eyes moved past the general store, past the hitching posts, and the water trough to the corner where the boardwalk ended and the shadows began. There, sitting on the ground with her back against the weathered wood, was a woman. She was thin, too thin. Her clothes hung off her like rags, an old coat wrapped around her shoulders despite the heat. Her hair was long and tangled, streaked with gray, that caught the light like threads of silver. In her arms, pressed against her chest, she held a rag doll. She rocked forward and back, humming a tune so soft it was barely audible. Carter's breath stopped. He took a step forward, then another. His boots felt heavy, as if the ground had turned to mud and was trying to hold him in place. His pulse pounded in his ears, a drumbeat that drowned out everything else. The woman did not look up. She continued rocking, continued humming, lost in whatever world existed behind her eyes. Carter moved closer. Close enough to see the dirt caked on her hands. Close enough to see the way her fingers trembled as they gripped the doll. Close enough to see her face. A gust of wind stirred the air, lifting a strand of her hair and pushing it back from her temple. There, running from her hairline down to her cheekbone, was a scar. White and thin, a line carved into flesh that had healed but never fully disappeared. Carter knew that scar. He had been there when it was made. 16 years old Eleanor Whitfield, back then, thrown from a spooked horse near the fence line of her father's ranch. He had held her hand while the doctor stitched her skin, had told her she would be fine, even though his own hands were shaking. The woman lifted her head. Her eyes, pale gray and distant, met his. She looked at him the way a person might look at a stranger who had wandered too close. There was no recognition in her gaze, no warmth, only a kind of quiet patience, as if she were waiting for him to say something or leave. "Do I know you?" she asked. Her voice was rough, worn thin by weather and time, and whatever she had endured in the years since he had last heard her speak. But the shape of it, the slight rise at the end of her question, hit Carter like a fist to the chest. He tried to speak. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His lungs felt too small, his chest too tight. He could not breathe. Tommy stepped forward. The boy moved past his father, his small boots scuffing the dirt, and knelt down in front of the woman. He looked at her with the same certainty he had when he pointed, the same calm that defied his age. "Ma," Tommy said softly. "It's me, Tommy." The woman's eyes shifted to the boy. Something changed in her face. Small, but real. A flicker of light in a dark room. Her hands tightened around the doll. "You're a good boy," she whispered. Tommy swallowed hard. His voice trembled when he spoke again. "You used to tell me that every night, before bed. You'd tuck me in and say, 'You're a good boy, Tommy, the best boy.'" The woman stared at him. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but the words would not come. Carter found his voice at last. It came out cracked, broken. "Eleanor." The woman frowned slightly, as if the name were a stone. She was turning in her mind, trying to understand its weight. "Is that my name?" Carter's knees almost gave. He locked them, forced himself to stand upright, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Yes," he said, and the words sounded like a prayer. "That's your name." She looked down at the ball in her arms, then back up at him. "I remember water," she whispered. "Cold. Darkness. I remember holding something precious. I didn't want to let go." Carter's eyes burned. Shame rose in him, thick and choking. He had stopped looking, had told himself it was the only way to survive, had built his life around the empty space she left brick by brick, until the wall was so high he could no longer see over it. And all this time she had been here, alive, lost, invisible. He took a step closer, careful as if approaching a frightened animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "I'll come back," he said, his voice shaking. "Tomorrow morning. I'll bring food, warm clothes. We'll talk. We'll figure this out." She blinked at him, and for a moment he thought he saw something in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or hope, or both. "You don't have to," she said. Her voice was flat, not unkind. Carter shook his head, once slow and deliberate. "Yes," he said, "I do." Tommy slipped his small hand into Carter's, gripping tight, as if he could anchor his father to the earth and keep him from running. Carter looked down at his son, at the boy who had seen what he could not, and felt something break open inside his chest. He turned toward the road that would take them home, but his eyes stayed on Eleanor until the last possible second. She had already started rocking again, humming the same broken tune, cradling the doll, as if it were the only thing in the world that mattered. As Carter walked away, one terrible thought followed him like a shadow. What if tomorrow was already too late? The sun had begun its descent toward the western hills by the time Carter and Tommy reached the ranch. The land spread out before them in rolling waves of gold and green, dotted with cattle that grazed in clusters beneath the wide sky. The house stood at the center of it all, a two-story structure built from timber and stone, with a wide porch and windows that caught the last of the daylight. Jack Reeves met them at the barn, his hat pushed back on his head, his face lined with concern. He was a man in his early 40s, built solid as an oak, with hands that could break a wild horse or mend a broken fence with equal skill. He had worked for Carter for 10 years and had learned when to speak and when to stay silent. He looked at Carter now and said nothing. Carter dismounted and handed over the reins. Tommy slid down from his horse and stood close to his father, still holding the wooden horse, still quiet. "Everything all right, boss?" Jack asked. Carter nodded once, a short, sharp movement. "Fine." Jack glanced at Tommy, then back at Carter. He did not believe the answer, but he knew better than to push. "Dinner is ready when you are." Carter nodded again and walked toward the house. Tommy followed his footsteps, light and quick, matching his father's longer stride. Inside the house was cool and dim, the thick walls keeping out the worst of the heat. The front room was furnished simply. A sofa, two chairs, a fireplace that had not been lit since spring. On the wall above the mantel hung a photograph in a wooden frame, a wedding portrait. Carter Harrison and Eleanor Whitfield, standing side by side, her hand resting on his arm, both of them young and solemn and filled with the kind of hope that comes from not yet knowing what life will take from you. Carter did not look at the photograph. He never looked at it. He walked through to the kitchen, where a pot of stew sat warming on the stove. The woman who cooked for them, Mrs. Callahan, had left hours ago, as she did every Sunday after preparing the evening meal. Carter ladled stew into two bowls and set them on the table. He and Tommy ate in silence, the only sound the scrape of spoons against ceramic and the ticking of the clock on the wall. When the meal was finished, Tommy stood and carried his bowl to the wash basin. He hesitated, then turned to face his father. "We found her," Tommy said. Carter looked up. "Yes. Why didn't we bring her home?" Carter set down his spoon. He met his son's gaze and saw the question there, the accusation hidden beneath the words. "She doesn't remember us." "Then we'll help her remember." "Tommy," Carter's voice was firm, "it's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because I don't know if I can do this again," Carter thought. "Because I buried her once and it almost killed me. Because if I let myself hope and she's taken away again, there will be nothing left of me." But he did not say any of that. Instead, he said, "Go to bed. We'll talk about it in the morning." Tommy stood his ground for a moment longer, his small face lit with determination. Then he nodded and left the kitchen, his footsteps soft on the stairs. Carter sat alone in the darkening room. He did not light a lamp. He simply sat, his hands flat on the table, his eyes staring at nothing. Hours passed. The house settled into its nightly creaks and groans, the wood contracting as the temperature dropped. Somewhere outside, a coyote called, its voice high and lonesome. Carter did not move. When he finally rose and climbed the stairs to his bedroom, it was well past midnight. He lay down on top of the covers, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. He did not sleep. Instead, he remembered. Eleanor Whitfield had been 19 when they married. Carter had been 23, newly returned from 2 years working cattle drives up to Montana, his pockets full of saved wages, and his head full of dreams about building something permanent. He had known Eleanor since they were children, had watched her grow from a girl with scraped knees and wild hair into a woman who could ride as well as any man and shoot straighter than most. He had loved her quietly for years before he found the courage to ask her father for permission to court her. And when she said yes, when she agreed to marry him and build a life together, he felt like the luckiest man alive. They had 10 good years before Tommy came. 3 years of learning each other, of building the ranch from a small homestead into something that could support a family. Eleanor worked alongside him, branding cattle, mending fences, keeping the books. She was strong, capable, unafraid of hard work or long days. And then Tommy was born and everything changed. Not in a bad way, in a way that made the world sharper, more vivid. Suddenly there was this small, fragile thing that depended on them for everything. And Eleanor, who had been fearless with horses and cattle, became cautious. She checked the baby a dozen times a night to make sure he was breathing. She worried about fevers and falls and all the thousand ways a child could be hurt. Carter had teased her about it. "He's tougher than he looks," he would say. "He's a Harrison." And Eleanor would smile and say, "He's mine. I'll worry if I want to." 4 years. That was all they had. 4 years of being a family, of watching Tommy grow from an infant into a boy who loved horses and wooden toys in his mother's bedtime stories. And then the river. Carter closed his eyes against the memory, but it came anyway, vivid and merciless. Spring 1885, the snow melting fast in the mountains, the river swelling beyond its banks. Tommy, 4 years old, playing near the water, while Carter worked on a fence line 100 yards away. The sky darkening, rain beginning to fall. Eleanor running from the house calling Tommy's name. Carter had looked up just in time to see his son at the water's edge reaching for something in the current. A puppy, a stray that had wandered onto their land and somehow ended up in the river struggling against the flow. Tommy had jumped in without thinking. Eleanor had not hesitated. She dove after him, her skirts billowing out around her as she hit the water. Carter had dropped his tools and sprinted toward the river, his boots pounding the mud, his heart in his throat. By the time he reached the bank, Eleanor had Tommy. She had grabbed him, pulled him to the shallows, shoved him toward the shore. Carter had waded in and dragged his son out, the boy coughing and crying but alive. And when Carter turned back to help Eleanor, she was gone. The current had taken her, pulled her under, swept her downstream so fast that by the time Carter realized what had happened, she was already out of sight. He had searched. God, he had searched. 2 weeks of riding the riverbank, dragging the water, asking anyone and everyone if they had seen her. Nothing. The river kept her, or so he had thought. Carter sat up in bed, his heart pounding. He swung his legs over the side and stood pacing to the window. Outside, the night was black and endless stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. She was alive. Eleanor was alive. For 3 years, she had been living in Sweetwater, sitting in the dirt, holding a rag doll, humming to herself, and no one had told him. No one had thought to say, "Carter, there's a woman in town who looks like your wife." Or maybe they had thought it. Maybe they had looked at her and wondered. But wondering was not the same as knowing. And no one wanted to be the one to dredge up old pain to make a fool of themselves by suggesting that a dead woman had come back to life. Carter pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. Tomorrow he would go back. He would bring food, clothes, whatever she needed. He would figure out what had happened to her, where she had been, how she had survived. And he would bring her home. The decision settled over him like a weight, heavy but necessary. He did not know if she would come willingly, did not know if she would ever remember him, remember Tommy, remember the life they had built together. But he had to try, because the alternative, leaving her there in the dirt while he went about his life, was unthinkable. Morning came too soon. Carter woke before dawn, dressed in the dark, and went downstairs to the kitchen. He built a fire in the stove and set about cooking. Potatoes, onions, beef. The same meal Eleanor used to make when the work was hard and the days were long. He cooked with the kind of focus he usually reserved for branding cattle or balancing ledgers, measuring and stirring and tasting until it was right. He wrapped the food in a clean cloth and tied it tight. Then he added a blanket, a canteen of fresh water, and a sack of apples. He did not know what else to bring, did not know what a woman who had been living on the streets for 3 years might need. He was loading the supplies onto his horse when Tommy appeared in the doorway of the barn, fully dressed, boots on his face, serious. "I'm coming," Tommy said. Carter wanted to tell him to stay home, wanted to protect him from whatever they might find, whatever might happen. But the boy had already seen her, had already recognized her when Carter had failed to. "All right," Carter said. They rode towards Sweetwater through the pale morning light. The sky was gray, turning blue, the air cool and fresh with dew. The land smelled of sage and damp earth. Tommy rode in front of Carter, leaning back against his father's chest, silent but steady, as if his presence alone could hold the whole fragile plan together. When they reached the edge of town, Sweetwater was just beginning to wake. Smoke rose from chimneys. A dog barked once and went quiet. The stores were still dark, their windows shuttered. Carter turned the corner toward the spot where they had seen her the day before. His stomach knotted with fear that she would be gone, that yesterday had been a dream or a mistake. But she was there. Eleanor sat in the same position, her back against the wood, her coat wrapped around her like armor. The rag doll was pressed to her chest. She was awake this time, her pale eyes tracking their approach as they dismounted and walked toward her. Her face had the same calm emptiness Carter had seen yesterday. But there was something else now, something behind it. A person standing in a doorway, unsure whether to step out or retreat. Carter stopped a few feet away and lowered himself to one knee so that he was at her level. It felt wrong to loom over her, wrong to crowd her. "You came back," Eleanor said. Her voice was flat, stating a fact. "I told you I would," Carter replied. She blinked. "Why?" Carter set the bundle of food on the ground between them. "Because you shouldn't be out here. Because you shouldn't be alone." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the doll. "I'm used to it." Tommy stepped forward, slow and careful as if approaching a wild horse. He held out an apple, his hand steady. "I brought you this, Ma." Eleanor stared at the apple. Then she reached out and took it with both hands as if it were something fragile, something precious. "Thank you," she whispered. Carter unwrapped the food and set it beside her. The smell rose between them, warm and familiar. Eleanor's eyes softened just a little. She took a bite of the apple, chewed slowly, and her gaze went distant, as if taste could pull a memory loose. "I know this," she said quietly. "You made it," Carter told her. "You used to make it for us." Her jaw worked, chewing, thinking. The rocking slowed. For a moment, her face looked less like a lost woman and more like someone trying to find her way back through fog. A door creaked behind them. Martha Cooper stepped out of the general store, her apron already tied around her waist, her gray hair pinned back in a tight bun. She froze when she saw Carter kneeling in the dirt. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice careful. Carter looked up. "Morning, Mrs. Cooper." Martha's eyes moved to Eleanor, then to Tommy, then back to Carter. Her hand went to her mouth as if she were holding in words that wanted to spill out. "I've been bringing her food," Martha said quietly, "since last year. She never caused trouble. She just sits here, just hums." Carter's throat tightened. "Thank you." Martha's expression hardened, a flash of anger, directed not at him, but at the situation, at the world that had allowed this to happen. "Don't thank me like it fixes anything. You take her somewhere warm, Mr. Harrison. You take her home." Carter nodded slowly. "That's why I'm here." Martha looked at Eleanor for a long moment, then nodded once, almost sharp, and went back inside the store. Tommy sat down in the dirt beside Eleanor without asking permission. He did not touch her. He simply stayed close, his presence a quiet anchor. "Do you remember me?" he asked. Eleanor stared at him for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was soft, uncertain. "I remember your eyes." Tommy swallowed hard. "You used to kiss my forehead every night before bed. You'd say, 'Sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite.'" Eleanor's hand trembled. She raised it halfway as if to touch his face, then stopped, as if the motion frightened her. Carter watched her and felt something he had not allowed himself to feel in 3 years. Hope. It was fragile, brittle, a thing that could shatter at the slightest pressure. But it was there, and for now that was enough. Carter knelt in the dirt outside Cooper's general store, watching Eleanor eat. She took small bites of the apple, chewing slowly, her eyes fixed on some point in the distance that only she could see. The morning sun climbed higher, burning off the coolness, turning the air warm and thick. People began to emerge from their homes and businesses. A man sweeping the boardwalk outside the saloon. Two women walking toward the church. A child running past with a hoop and stick. Each one slowed when they saw the scene at the corner. Each one stared. Carter felt their eyes on him like brands pressing into his skin. He did not care. Tommy sat cross-legged beside Eleanor, holding his wooden horse, turning it over in his small hands. He spoke to her in a low voice, telling her about the ranch, about Shadow. The black stallion, about the new foals born that spring. Eleanor listened without responding, but her rocking had stopped. That was something. "Mr. Harrison." Carter looked up. A cluster of townspeople had gathered at a respectful distance. Among them was Cole Brennan, a rancher who owned land bordering Carter's property to the west. Cole was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a face weathered by sun and wind and 46 years of hard living. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Heard you found yourself a stray, Cole said. Carter stood slowly. He did not dust the dirt from his knees. You have something to say, Brennan. Cole's smile widened. Just wondering if you've lost your mind, that's all. That woman's been sitting in that spot for near a year, eating scraps, talking to herself, and now you're kneeling in front of her like she's the Virgin Mary herself. A few people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded. Carter took a step forward. She's my wife. Cole laughed a short bark of sound. Your wife died 3 years ago, Harrison. We all know it. Hell, we were at the funeral. There was no body in that coffin. Because the river took her. Because that's what rivers do. Cole's smile faded. You really think this woman is Eleanor? You think she survived 3 years out here and nobody noticed? I'm looking at her right now, Carter said, his voice low and dangerous. I know my wife. Cole shook his head. What you know is grief, and grief makes a man see things that aren't there. Carter's hands curled into fists. He felt the anger rising hot and sharp, but before he could speak, Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. I remember water. Everyone turned to look at her. She was staring at Carter, her pale eyes clearer than they had been moments before. Cold water, she continued. Darkness. I was holding something. I didn't want to let go. Cole scoffed. She's crazy. Listen to her. Carter ignored him. He moved back to Eleanor and knelt down again. What were you holding, Ellie? She frowned, struggling with the memory. Something small, something precious. Her eyes shifted to Tommy. A boy. Tommy's breath caught. You saved me, he whispered. From the river. Eleanor's gaze fixed on the child. For a moment, something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe. Or the ghost of it. I had to, she said simply. Carter felt his chest tighten. He looked back at Cole at the crowd. She's coming home with me. Cole's face hardened. You bring a crazy woman to live with your boy, that's your funeral, but don't expect the rest of us to pretend this makes sense. I don't expect anything from you, Carter said. Now get off my sight before I make you. Cole held his gaze for a long moment, then spat in the dirt and walked away. The crowd began to disperse, some muttering, some shaking their heads. Only Martha Cooper remained standing in the doorway of her store. She stepped forward and looked down at Eleanor. Mrs. Harrison, she said gently, do you know who this man is? Eleanor studied Carter. He says he's my husband. Do you believe him? Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I don't know what to believe. Martha nodded. Fair enough. She looked at Carter. She needs a bath, clean clothes, a proper meal. You get her those things and maybe she'll start to remember. Carter stood and offered his hand to Eleanor. She stared at it as if it were a foreign object, something she could not quite understand. I won't hurt you, he said. I know. But still she did not move. Tommy stood and held out his hand instead, his small fingers open and waiting. Eleanor looked at the boy, then slowly reached out and placed her hand in his. Together they helped her to her feet. She swayed unsteady and Carter caught her elbow to keep her from falling. She flinched at the touch but did not pull away. We're going home, Carter said. Eleanor looked at him. Where is home? I'll show you. They walked to where the horses were tied. Carter lifted Tommy onto his saddle first, then turned to help Eleanor. She stared at the horse with wide eyes. I don't think I know how, she said. You do. Your body remembers even if your mind doesn't. He placed his hands on her waist and lifted her up behind Tommy. She gripped the saddle horn with white-knuckled hands, her breathing quick and shallow. Carter mounted behind her, his arms coming around to hold the reins. She was pressed against his chest so thin he could feel every bone in her spine. Shadow, the 12-year-old black stallion tied nearby, raised his head and watched, his ears pricked forward. He took a step toward them, nostrils flaring. Eleanor turned her head and looked at the horse. Something passed between them, a moment of silent communication. Shadow whinnied softly. I know you, Eleanor whispered. The horse stepped closer, close enough that she could reach out and touch his muzzle. When her fingers made contact with his soft nose, Shadow went very still. He breathed out a long, steady exhale and leaned into her touch. Carter stared. Shadow had not let anyone but him near since Eleanor's disappearance. The horse had been wild with grief, kicking and biting, refusing food, standing at the fence every evening, as if waiting for someone who would never come. But now he stood calm, patient, allowing this woman to stroke his face. "We should go," Carter said quietly. He urged his horse forward. Shadow followed without being led, walking alongside them as they left Sweetwater behind. The ride to the ranch took an hour. Eleanor sat rigid in the saddle, her hands gripping the horn, as if letting go would mean falling into an abyss. Tommy leaned back against his father, but his eyes stayed on his mother, watching her every movement. The land spread out around them, endless and golden under the morning sun. Cattle grazed in distant fields. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermals. The mountains rose blue and hazy on the horizon. Eleanor's breathing began to slow. Her grip loosened slightly. She turned her head, taking in the landscape, and something in her expression shifted. "I know this place," she said so quietly Carter almost missed it. "You should," he replied. "You lived here for 4 years." 4 years. She repeated the words as if testing their weight. "That seems like a very long time." It was, and then it wasn't. When the ranch came into view, Eleanor stared at the house, the barn, the corrals. Her brow furrowed as if she were trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Jack Reeves stood near the barn, a coil of rope in his hands. When he saw them approaching, he went very still. The rope slipped from his fingers and fell to the dirt. "Boss," he said, his voice hoarse. "Is that—" "Yes," Carter said. Jack's weathered face went pale. He removed his hat and pressed it to his chest. "Mrs. Harrison." Eleanor looked at him with the same blank curiosity she had shown everyone else. "Do I know you?" Jack's throat worked. "Yes, ma'am. I work for your husband. Have for 10 years. She nodded as if this information meant nothing. Carter dismounted and helped Eleanor down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground. He steadied her, his hands on her arms, and she leaned against him for just a moment before pulling away. "Everyone back to work," Carter said, his voice carrying across the yard. "And nobody bothers her. Nobody asks questions. Anyone has a problem with that, they can collect their pay and leave." The ranch hands who had gathered to stare scattered quickly. Carter led Eleanor toward the house. Tommy ran ahead to open the door. Inside, the air was cool and still dust motes floating in the shafts of sunlight that fell through the windows. Eleanor stepped over the threshold and stopped. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in the furniture, the rugs, the photographs on the walls. She walked to the fireplace and stared at the wedding portrait hanging above the mantel. "Is that me?" she asked. "Yes." She leaned closer, studying the young woman in the photograph. "She looks happy." "You were." Eleanor turned to face him. And now, Carter did not know how to answer that. Tommy appeared at Eleanor's side. "I'll show you your room, Ma." He took her hand and led her up the stairs. Carter followed at a distance, watching as Tommy pushed open the door to the bedroom that had once belonged to both Carter and Eleanor. The room had not changed. The bed was made with the same quilt Eleanor had sewn before Tommy was born. Her hairbrush still sat on the dresser. Her clothes still hung in the wardrobe untouched for 3 years. Eleanor stepped inside and looked around slowly. She moved to the window and placed her hand on the glass, staring out at the land beyond. "I remember this light," she said softly, "the way it comes through in the afternoon." Tommy's face lit up with hope. "You do." "I think so, or maybe I just wish I did." She turned back to them. "I'm very tired." Carter nodded. "Rest. I'll bring you some water, some clean clothes." Eleanor looked down at herself, at the filthy coat and torn dress. "Yes, that would be good." Carter left her there and went downstairs. He filled a basin with water from the pump, found soap and clean towels, and carried them back up. When he knocked on the door, Eleanor opened it only wide enough to take the items from him. "Thank you," she said, and closed the door. Carter stood in the hallway, listening to the sounds of water splashing, cloth moving. After a long while, the door opened again. Eleanor stood there in a clean dress, her hair wet and combed back from her face. Without the dirt and tangles, she looked more like the woman he remembered. Older, thinner, but undeniably Eleanor. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," she hesitated. "The clothes fit." "They're yours." She looked down at the dress as if seeing it for the first time. "I don't remember them." "That's all right." Eleanor met his eyes. "Will I remember, I mean?" "I don't know," Carter said honestly, "but we'll figure it out together." That night, Carter cooked dinner. Beef stew again, because it was the only thing he knew how to make well. Eleanor sat at the table and ate slowly, methodically, as if the act of eating required all her concentration. Tommy chattered about the horses, about the new kittens in the barn, about everything and nothing, filling the silence with his voice. Eleanor listened but contributed little. When the meal was finished, she stood and carried her bowl to the wash basin. "I should help clean up," she said. "You don't have to." "I want to." She washed the dishes with the same careful focus she had brought to eating. Carter dried them and put them away. They worked in silence, and for a moment it almost felt normal, as if the last 3 years had not happened, as if Eleanor had simply been away for a day and was now home where she belonged. But then she turned to him and asked, "Where should I sleep?" And the illusion shattered. "Your room," Carter said, "the one upstairs." "Will you be there?" The question caught him off guard. He struggled for an answer. "I can sleep in the spare room if that's more comfortable for you." Eleanor considered this. "I don't know what's comfortable anymore." "Then we'll take it slow." She nodded and went upstairs. Carter waited until he heard the door close before he allowed himself to breathe. He slept in the spare room that night, or tried to. Mostly he lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around him. Once he thought he heard Eleanor cry out, but when he went to check on her, she was asleep. Her breathing steady, the rag doll clutched to her chest. He went back to his own bed and did not sleep until dawn. Morning came with the smell of coffee. Carter woke disoriented, his mind foggy. He had not slept more than 2 hours. He dressed and went downstairs to find Eleanor standing at the stove, staring at the coffee pot as if it were a puzzle she could not solve. "Good morning," he said. She turned, startled. "I thought I knew how to make this. My hands were moving before I thought about it. But now I'm not sure if I did it right." Carter poured himself a cup and took a sip. It was strong and bitter, exactly the way Eleanor used to make it. "It's perfect," he said. A small smile flickered across her face and then vanished. Over the next days, a fragile routine developed. Eleanor woke early and tried to help with breakfast. Sometimes she succeeded. Sometimes she stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, overwhelmed by choices and memories that would not come. Carter learned to give her space, to let her figure things out on her own. Tommy attached himself to his mother like a shadow. He showed her the ranch, the barn, the horses. He told her stories about things they had done together, hoping to trigger some recognition. Eleanor listened patiently but remembered little. On the third day, she woke screaming. Carter bolted from his bed and ran to her room. He found her sitting upright, her eyes wide and unseeing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Cold," she gasped. "So cold. The water. I can't breathe." "Eleanor." Carter moved to the bed but did not touch her. "You're not in the water. You're safe. You're home." She turned her head toward his voice. Her eyes focused slowly. "Carter." It was the first time she had said his name without prompting. "Yes. I had a dream, a nightmare. I was drowning, and there was a boy. I was trying to save him." "You did save him. You saved Tommy." Her breathing began to slow. She looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. "Where am I?" "You're home." She nodded, but her hands were shaking. Carter sat on the edge of the bed, keeping a careful distance between them. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked. "No, I just want to forget again." Tommy appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Ma, are you all right?" Eleanor looked at her son, and something in her expression softened. "I'm all right, sweetheart. Just a bad dream." Tommy climbed onto the bed and curled up beside her. Eleanor hesitated, then put her arm around him. They sat like that, the three of them, in the pre-dawn darkness, until the nightmares faded and morning came. The fourth day brought visitors. Carter was working in the barn when he heard horses approaching. He stepped outside to see Dr. Harlan dismounting in the yard, his medical bag in hand. The doctor was a man in his 60s, stooped with age, but still sharp-eyed. "Carter," he said, "I heard the news. Thought I should come out and take a look." "She's inside." Dr. Harlan followed Carter into the house. They found Eleanor in the kitchen peeling potatoes. She looked up when they entered, her expression wary. "Mrs. Harrison," Dr. Harlan said gently. "Do you remember me?" Eleanor studied his face. "No, should I? I delivered your son. Stitched up that scar on your face when you were 16. Eleanor's hand went to her temple, touching the scar, as if feeling it for the first time. "You did that?" "I did. And I'm glad to see you alive, ma'am. Very glad." He set his bag on the table and asked permission to examine her. Eleanor agreed, though she kept glancing at Carter as if for reassurance. Dr. Harlan was thorough. He checked her pulse, her eyes, her reflexes. He asked questions about what she remembered, where she had been, how she had survived. Eleanor answered as best she could, but her memories were fragmented, pieces of a story with no beginning or end. When he finished, Dr. Harlan pulled Carter aside. "It's her," he said quietly. "No doubt in my mind. But her mind has been damaged. Trauma like this, it can take years to heal. She may never remember everything. Will she get better? That depends on what you mean by better. She's lucid, she can function. But the woman she was, that woman is gone, Carter. This is someone new, someone shaped by survival and hardship." Carter absorbed this. "Can I keep her here? Is it safe?" Dr. Harlan's expression darkened. "Legally, that's the question, isn't it? Once word gets out, and it will, people are going to have opinions. Some will say she needs to be in an institution. The county might get involved. Let them try. I'm just warning you. Be prepared." After Dr. Harlan left, Carter found Eleanor standing in the doorway watching the doctor's bogey disappear down the road. "What did he say?" she asked. "That you're healing, that it will take time." "Did he say I would remember?" Carter chose his words carefully. "He said it's possible, but not certain." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I'm not sure I want to remember. The things I do remember are frightening. Cold, dark, pain." She turned to face him. "If I don't remember, does that mean I'm not really your wife? You're Eleanor Harrison. That's all that matters." "Is it?" Carter did not have an answer. That afternoon, Tommy convinced Eleanor to visit the horses. They walked to the barn together, Tommy chattering excitedly, Eleanor following more slowly, her steps hesitant. Shadow stood in his stall, his black coat gleaming in the shaft of sunlight that fell through the open door. When he saw Eleanor, he nickered softly and moved to the gate. Eleanor approached cautiously. She reached out and touched his neck. Shadow leaned into her hand, his eyes half closing. "He remembers you," Tommy said. "How can you tell?" "Because he was sad after you left. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't let anyone ride him except Father. But now he's happy." Eleanor stroked the horse's mane. "He used to steal apples," she said suddenly. "From the pantry. I would hear him outside the window trying to open the latch." Tommy's face lit up. "Yes, and you blamed the mice." Eleanor smiled, a real smile this time. "I did, didn't I? Father never believed you." Eleanor looked back at Carter, who stood in the doorway watching them. "Did you?" "I believed you," Carter said. "I just liked watching you argue about it." Her smile widened slightly. Then she turned back to Shadow and rested her forehead against his neck. The horse stood perfectly still, as if understanding that this moment was important. Carter watched them and felt something loosen in his chest, not hope exactly, something smaller and more fragile, the possibility of hope. The following days brought more pieces of Eleanor back. Not memories exactly, but habits. The way she held a knife when cutting vegetables, the path she took from the house to the barn, the spot where she stood to watch the sunset. Her body remembered what her mind did not. But with each small victory came new challenges. Eleanor still woke with nightmares, still froze sometimes in the middle of a task, overwhelmed by the weight of all she had forgotten. Still looked at Carter as if he were a stranger who happened to share her house. On the seventh day, Sheriff Hayes rode out to the ranch. Carter met him in the yard, his jaw tight. "Sheriff." Hayes was a man in his 50s, lean and hard with eyes that missed nothing. "Carter, need to talk to you." "About what?" "About the woman living in your house." Carter's hands curled into fists. "That's my wife." "I know, I believe you, but Cole Brennan's been talking, says she's not right in the head, says she's dangerous." "Cole Brennan is a liar and a drunk." "Maybe so, but he's got friends in the county office, and they're asking questions." "Let them ask." Hayes shifted his weight. "Carter, I'm on your side here, but you need to be prepared. If they decide she's not fit, they can take her. Put her in the asylum in Cheyenne." Carter felt his blood run cold. "Over my dead body." "That's what I figured you'd say, which is why I'm here, to warn you. Get your ducks in a row. Get people who'll testify that she's Eleanor, that she's getting better, that she's not a danger." "She's not." "I know, but you're going to have to prove it." After the sheriff left, Carter told Eleanor what had been said. She listened without expression, her hands folded in her lap. "They want to send me away," she said when he finished. "I won't let them." You might not have a choice. I'll always have a choice. Eleanor looked out the window at the land beyond. Maybe it would be better if I went somewhere they could help me remember. No, Carter's voice was sharp. Those places don't help people. They break them. I'm already broken. You're healing. He moved to sit beside her and Eleanor, I don't care if you never remember another thing. You're home, you're safe, and I will fight anyone who tries to take you away. She turned to look at him, her pale eyes searching his face. Why, Ben? Because you're my wife, because I lost you once, and I won't lose you again. But I don't remember being your wife. Then we'll start over. Build something new. Eleanor was quiet for a long time. Then she reached out and placed her hand on top of his. It was the first time she had touched him willingly since coming home. All right, she said. We'll try. That night, for the first time since her return, Eleanor did not wake screaming. She slept through until morning, and when she came downstairs, there was color in her cheeks that had not been there before. Small steps, but steps nonetheless. 2 weeks passed. Eleanor's presence in the house became less strange with each day, though no less fragile. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the sounds of morning and evening, the way sunlight moved across the floors. She helped in the kitchen, her hands remembering skills her mind had forgotten. She spent hours in the barn with Shadow, talking to the horse in low tones that Carter could not hear. But the town of Sweetwater was not content to let her be. On a Tuesday morning, the sound of hooves brought Carter out of the barn. A wagon rolled into the yard, dust rising in its wake. 2 men sat on the bench. Carter recognized Sheriff Hayes immediately. The other man was a stranger dressed in a dark suit, despite the heat, his face sharp and cold. Carter wiped his hands on his pants and walked out to meet them. Behind him, he heard the house door open. Eleanor stood on the porch, one hand gripping the rail. Sheriff, Carter said. Hayes climbed down from the wagon, his expression apologetic. Carter, this is Mr. Thornton. He's from the county office. Thornton remained seated, looking down at Carter from his perch. Mr. Harrison, I've come to discuss the woman residing on your property. Carter's jaw tightened. That's my wife. So you claim. Thornton pulled a leather folder from beside him and opened it. We've received multiple complaints, concerns about a woman with diminished mental capacity living in close proximity to a minor child. She's not dangerous. That remains to be determined. Thornton's eyes moved past Carter to where Eleanor stood. I'll need to interview her, assess her condition. No. Mr. Harrison, this is not a request. The county has a responsibility to protect vulnerable individuals and ensure the safety of children. Carter took a step forward. You're not coming near her. Sheriff Hayes raised his hands. Carter, let's keep this civil. Mr. Thornton just wants to ask a few questions, that's all. Questions designed to take her away. Thornton's expression did not change. If she is indeed your wife as you claim, then a simple interview should pose no problem. Carter looked back at Eleanor. She stood very still, her face pale, her hands trembling on the rail. Tommy had appeared beside her, his small body positioned between his mother and the strangers. Fine, Carter said, but I'm present for every question, and you keep a civil tongue or this ends. They moved to the porch. Thornton climbed down from the wagon with his folder and a pen. He settled into one of the chairs without being invited, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Eleanor remained standing, her back against the wall of the house. Your name, Thornton asked. Eleanor glanced at Carter. Eleanor Harrison. You don't sound certain. That's what I've been told. Thornton made a note. And where did you reside prior to arriving at this ranch? In Sweetwater. On the street. For how long? I don't know, a long time. And before that, Eleanor's breathing quickened. I don't remember. You don't remember where you lived? Where you came from? No. Thornton leaned back in his chair. Mr. Harrison claims you are his wife, who disappeared 3 years ago. Do you have any memory of being married to him? Eleanor's hands clenched. No. Oh, do you remember living in this house? No, but sometimes things feel familiar. Familiar is not the same as remembering. Thornton turned to Carter. Mr. Harrison, you understand that this woman's testimony does not support your claim. She has the scar, Carter said. The one Dr. Harlan stitched when she was 16. She knows things only Eleanor would know. Such as Shadow, the horse. He recognized her immediately. Thornton's lip curled slightly. Animals can be trained. and scars can be coincidental. Tommy stepped forward. She sings my song, the one only my mother knew. Thornton looked at the boy as if noticing him for the first time. And what song is that? Tommy's voice was small but steady. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. A common lullaby, hardly evidence of identity. Carter's hands curled into fists. What do you want, Thornton? I want the truth. Thornton closed his folder. And the truth as I see it is that you've taken in a disturbed vagrant and convinced yourself she's your dead wife. Whether out of grief or desperation or simple delusion, I cannot say. But I can say that this situation is inappropriate and potentially dangerous. Get off my land. I will return Mr. Harrison, with proper authority. And when I do this, woman will be removed for her own protection and yours. Thornton stood and descended the porch steps. You have 1 week to prove she is who you say she is. After that, she comes with me. He climbed back into the wagon. Sheriff Hayes followed, though he did not look at Carter as they drove away. Eleanor slid down the wall until she was sitting on the porch boards, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was shaking. Carter knelt beside her. He can't take you. I won't let him. He can, Eleanor whispered. You heard him. 1 week. Then we'll prove it. We'll get people to testify. Dr. Harlan, Martha Cooper, Jack. And if they don't believe them? Carter had no answer. That night, a letter appeared under the door. Carter found it in the morning, a folded piece of paper with no name on the outside. He opened it carefully. The handwriting was crude, scrawled in uneven letters. She's not who you think. Ask her about the man by the river. Some secrets are better left drowned. Carter stared at the words until they blurred. Then he crumpled the paper and threw it into the fire. But the doubt had been planted. That evening, after Tommy had gone to bed, Carter found Eleanor on the porch, staring out at the darkening land. Can I ask you something, he said. Yes. Those 3 years, when you were in Sweetwater, was there anyone who helped you? Anyone who looked after you? Eleanor frowned. Martha gave me food. Sometimes other people would leave things. Bread, blankets. Anyone else? A man, maybe. Her expression changed, a flicker of something that might have been fear. There was someone, a man who asked questions. Carter felt his stomach tighten. What kind of questions? About who I was, where I came from. She paused. He seemed interested in my name, in whether anyone was looking for me. Did he hurt you? No, but he made me nervous. I stayed away from him after that. When was this? I don't know. Time doesn't make sense in my memory. Everything runs together. Carter sat beside her. If someone comes forward and says you're not Eleanor, would you believe them? She turned to look at him. Would you? Why am? No. Then why does it matter what I believe? It was a good question. One Carter could not answer. The next morning, Carter rode into Sweetwater to speak with Martha Cooper. He found her arranging canned goods on shelves, her movements practiced and efficient. Mr. Harrison, she said when she saw him. How's Eleanor? Frightened. The county's threatening to take her. Martha's face hardened. That's nonsense. They say she can't prove who she is. She doesn't have to prove it. Anyone with eyes can see it. Will you testify to that if it comes to a hearing? Martha set down the can she was holding and looked Carter straight in the eye. Of course I will, but you should know something. What? There was a man about a year ago asking questions about Eleanor, about the woman on the street. He wanted to know if anyone knew who she was, if anyone was looking for her. Carter's chest tightened. What did he look like? Big fellow, rough around the edges. He didn't give a name. Martha paused. But I saw him talking to Cole Brennan one night, outside the saloon. Seemed friendly. Carter thanked her and left. He rode directly to Brennan's ranch anger building with each mile. He found Cole working on a fence line, hammering posts into hard ground. Cole looked up when he heard the horse approach, and his expression turned wary. Harrison. Carter dismounted. Who was the man? What man? The one asking about Eleanor last year. The one you sent to find out if anyone was looking for her. Cole set down his hammer. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Brennan. Cole's face flushed. All right, yes, I asked someone to look into it. When that woman showed up in town, I thought she looked familiar. Thought maybe it was your wife. But then I thought if she was Eleanor, why wasn't she at your ranch? Why was she living like a beggar? So you just left her there? I didn't want to get your hopes up if I was wrong. And then the more I watched, the more I thought I must be wrong. Because no one forgets their own name, Harrison. No one forgets their own husband. Carter stepped closer. You could have told me. I figured if it was really her, she'd find her way home eventually. And if it wasn't, I'd spare you the pain of thinking you'd found her when you hadn't. That wasn't your choice to make. Cole's jaw said, maybe not, but I stand by it. That woman in your house, Harrison, I don't think she's Eleanor. I think she's someone who looks like her. Someone you want to be her. Carter hit him, one solid punch that sent Cole sprawling in the dirt. Cole wiped blood from his lip and laughed. That's what I thought. You're so desperate to have her back, you'll believe anything. Carter stood over him. Stay away from my wife. Stay away from my family. If I see you near the ranch again, I'll finish this. He mounted his horse and rode home, his knuckles aching, his mind churning with doubt and rage. When he arrived, he found Eleanor in the barn brushing Shadow's coat. She looked up when she heard him enter. What happened? She asked, seeing the blood on his hand. Nothing important. She set down the brush and came to him, taking his hand in hers. You're hurt. It's nothing. She led him to the water trough and cleaned the blood away. Her touch was gentle, methodical. When she finished, she looked up at him. Who did you hit, Cole Brennan? Why, because he knew you were alive and didn't tell me. Eleanor processed this. Maybe he didn't know for certain. He should have said something, given me the chance to find out. And if it hadn't been me, if I'd been someone else, Carter had no answer. Eleanor released his hand. I keep thinking about what Mr. Thornton said, that I can't prove who I am. And he's right, I can't. You don't have to prove it. But I do, because if I can't, they'll take me away, and then Tommy will lose his mother again, and you'll be alone. She paused. Maybe that would be easier, for both of you. Don't. Don't what? Don't act like leaving is an act of mercy. It's not. Eleanor looked away. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need protection. I need you to fight. I don't know how. Carter took her shoulders, gently turning her to face him. Then I'll teach you. 3 days later, the fire came. It started in the south barn, the one where they stored hay and equipment. Jack saw the smoke first and raised the alarm. By the time Carter reached it, flames were licking up the walls, spreading fast in the dry wood. Get the horses out, he shouted. The ranch hands scrambled, opening stalls, leading panicked animals into the yard. But the smoke was thick and dark, and the horses fought against their handlers, wild with fear. Carter ran toward the barn, but Jack grabbed his arm. Boss, it's too dangerous. Shadow's still in there. He pulled free and ran inside. The heat hit him like a wall. Smoke burned his lungs. He could hear Shadow screaming, a sound of pure terror, and he followed it to the stall at the back. The stallion was rearing, his eyes rolling white. The gate was jammed, wedged shut by a fallen beam. Carter grabbed the beam and pulled. It was too heavy, too hot. His hands blistered on the wood. Then Eleanor was beside him. She appeared through the smoke like a ghost, her dress already singed, her face streaked with soot. She grabbed the beam and helped him lift. What are you doing? Carter shouted. Saving him. Together they heaved the beam aside. Carter threw open the stall gate and grabbed Shadow's halter. The horse fought him, terrified beyond reason. Easy, Eleanor said, her voice somehow cutting through the chaos. Easy, boy. Shadow's ear flicked toward her voice. She moved to his head, placed her hand on his neck, and began to hum. The same tune she had hummed on the street in Sweetwater. The lullaby. Shadow went still. Eleanor took his halter and led him out of the stall through the smoke and flames toward the door. The horse followed her without resistance, trusting her completely. They burst out into the open air. Carter's lungs heaved, dragging in clean breaths. Behind them, part of the barn roof collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks. The ranch hands had formed a bucket line, working to keep the fire from spreading to the other buildings. Eleanor led Shadow to the far corral and released him. Then she turned back as if to go inside again. Carter caught her arm. No, it's done. But the other animals, they're out. Everyone's out. She sagged against him, coughing. Her hands were burned, her dress ruined. But she was smiling. We saved him, she said. Carter looked at her, at this woman who had run into a burning building without hesitation, and felt something settle in his chest. Not doubt, not fear, certainty. Yes, he said, we did. Jack appeared, his face grim. Boss, I found this. He held out a piece of oiled cloth, charred but recognizable, the kind used to start fires. This wasn't an accident, Jack said. Carter looked toward the road toward Sweetwater and knew exactly who was responsible. That evening, after the fire was out and the damage assessed, the ranch hands gathered in the yard. They were tired, soot-stained, some with minor burns, but they looked at Eleanor with something new in their eyes. Respect. Mrs. Harrison, one of them said, an older hand named Pete, that was the bravest damn thing I've ever seen. Eleanor shook her head. I just did what needed doing. You saved Shadow. That horse is the heart of this ranch. Pete removed his hat. Anyone says you don't belong here, they'll have to answer to me. The other men murmured agreement. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. That night, as Carter tended to her burned hands, wrapping them in clean bandages, he said, you could have died in there. So could you. I had to go. Shadow's mine. He's mine too, Eleanor said quietly. I remembered that today. When I heard him screaming, I knew I couldn't let him die. Carter tied off the bandage. You're getting stronger. Or more foolish. No, stronger. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since coming home. Carter, if they take me away, promise me something. They won't. Promise me you'll take care of Tommy, that you'll tell him I didn't want to leave, that I fought to stay. Eleanor, promise me. He took her bandaged hands in his. I promise, but it won't come to that. How do you know? Because I won't let it. 2 days later, Mr. Thornton returned. This time he brought a doctor with him, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles in a black bag. They arrived without warning, the wagon rolling into the yard as Carter was working with the horses. Mr. Harrison, Thornton said, this is Dr. Blackwell. He's here to conduct a proper evaluation. Carter wiped his hands. I told you she doesn't need an evaluation. The county disagrees. Thornton climbed down from the wagon. Where is she? Eleanor appeared on the porch, her hands still bandaged. Tommy stood beside her, his face set with determination beyond his years. Dr. Blackwell approached with his bag. Mrs. Harrison, I need to ask you some questions. I don't want to answer questions. It won't take long. I said no. Thornton's expression hardened. Mr. Harrison, either she submits to this evaluation willingly, or we will obtain a court order. Either way, it's happening. Carter looked at Eleanor. She met his eyes, and in that moment, he saw the decision she had made. Fine, she said. Ask your questions. They moved inside to the front room. Dr. Blackwell sat across from Eleanor while Thornton took notes. Carter and Tommy stood in the doorway watching. What is your full name? Dr. Blackwell began. Eleanor Harrison. Where were you born? Eleanor hesitated. I don't remember. When did you marry Mr. Harrison? I don't remember. What year is it? A longer pause. 1888. What month? I don't know. Summer. Dr. Blackwell made notes. Can you tell me what you did yesterday? I helped fight a fire. I saved a horse. And before that, I made breakfast. I cleaned. I talked to my son. Your son. What's his name? Tommy. How old is he? Eleanor's brow furrowed. 7, I think 7. You think, I know he's 7. I just said it wrong. Dr. Blackwell leaned back. Mrs. Harrison, do you understand that you've been living on the streets for approximately 3 years? Yes. Can you tell me anything about those years where you slept, how you survived? I slept wherever I could. People gave me food sometimes. I don't remember much else. Do you remember how you came to be on the streets? Eleanor's hands clenched. Water. Cold water. I was drowning. And after that, I woke up on the riverbank. I didn't know who I was or where I came from. So I walked until I found a town. Dr. Blackwell exchanged a glance with Thornton. Mrs. Harrison, have you experienced hallucinations? Heard voices that others cannot hear? No. Do you ever feel compelled to harm yourself or others? No. Do you believe this man is truly your husband? Eleanor looked at Carter. I believe he believes it, and I'm starting to believe it too. Mr. Blackwell closed his notebook. Mr. Thornton, might I speak with you outside? They stepped onto the porch. Carter followed, leaving Tommy with Eleanor. Well, Thornton asked. She exhibits clear signs of dissociative amnesia, likely triggered by trauma. Her memory is severely compromised. She cannot recall basic facts about her own history. Is she dangerous? Not in the traditional sense, but she is not of sound mind. She requires professional care. You mean an asylum? I mean a facility equipped to handle cases of severe memory loss and possible psychosis. Carter stepped forward. She's not insane. Dr. Blackwell regarded him with cold eyes. Mr. Harrison, your attachment to this woman is understandable but misguided. She may wear your wife's face, but the woman who was Eleanor Harrison is gone. What remains is a damaged shell. Get off my property. Thornton pulled out his folder. Mr. Harrison, the county has made its decision. This woman will be transferred to Wyoming State Hospital for a minimum 60-day evaluation. If you resist, we will remove the child as well for his protection. The words hit Carter like a physical blow. You can't do that. We can and we will. You have until tomorrow morning to say your goodbyes. They climbed into the wagon and drove away, leaving Carter standing in the yard, his world crumbling around him. He went inside to find Eleanor sitting on the floor, Tommy in her arms, both of them crying. I won't go, Eleanor said. I won't let them take me. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Carter knelt beside them. If you run, they'll use it as proof that you're unstable. They'll hunt you down and they'll take Tommy. Then what do we do? I don't know. They sat together as the light faded, the three of them holding on to each other as if they could keep the world at bay through sheer force of will. When Tommy finally fell asleep, Carter carried him upstairs. When he came back down, Eleanor was gone. He found her note on the kitchen table written in shaky handwriting. I won't let them use me to hurt you. I won't let them take Tommy. Tell him I love him. Tell him I'm sorry. Carter ran outside calling her name. But the yard was empty. The horse she had taken was gone. She had run, and in running, she had sealed her fate. Carter saddled his horse and rode for Sweetwater, his heart in his throat. He had to find her before they did, had to convince her to come back to fight this the right way. But when he reached town, Sheriff Hayes was already waiting. She's at the river, Carter, the place where she disappeared. They rode together in silence, following the Snake River downstream. When they crested the ridge, Carter saw her. Eleanor stood at the water's edge, staring at the black current that rushed past. She was still so still, like a statue carved from stone. Carter dismounted and walked toward her, slowly, afraid that any sudden movement would send her over the edge. Eleanor! She turned. Her face was wet with tears. I remember this place. I know. I remember everything. Carter stopped. What? The fire, the nightmares. They triggered something. And tonight it all came back. She looked at the river. Tommy was drowning. He jumped in after a puppy. I dove in without thinking. I grabbed him. I pushed him to shore. But the current was so strong. Her voice broke. I hit my head on a rock. I remember going under. Thinking that Tommy was safe. That was all that mattered. And then nothing. Just darkness. When I woke up, I was miles downstream. Days had passed. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know where I belonged. So I walked. I found Sweetwater. And I stayed because I couldn't think of anywhere else to go. Carter moved closer. You tried to come back. To the ranch. 3 times, but the men chased me away. And after that, I was afraid. Afraid they'd hurt me if I tried again. God, Eleanor. She looked at him. Do you know what the worst part was? Not remembering you. Not remembering Tommy. But knowing deep in my bones that I'd lost something precious. Feeling that loss every day and not knowing why. Carter closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. She collapsed against him, sobbing all the grief and pain and fear, finally breaking through. I'm so sorry, he said. I should have kept looking. I should have known. You couldn't have known. I should have felt it. Should have known you were still out there. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other as the river rushed past, carrying their old grief away. Finally, Eleanor pulled back. What happens now? We go back. We face this together. They'll take me away. Not if I can help it. The hearing was held in the county courthouse 3 days later. The small courtroom was packed with people from Sweetwater and beyond come to witness the spectacle of Carter Harrison fighting to keep his wife. Judge Miller presided, an old man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. Mr. Thornton sat at one table with Dr. Blackwell. Carter and Eleanor sat at another with no lawyer, only Sheriff Hayes standing beside them as a character witness. Thornton presented his case first. He called Dr. Blackwell to testify about Eleanor's mental state, her memory loss, her inability to recall basic facts. Then he called Cole Brennan. Cole took the stand and swore to tell the truth. Then he looked at Eleanor and said, "I knew Eleanor Harrison for 10 years. That woman is not her." The courtroom erupted in whispers. "Order," Judge Miller said, banging his gavel. Thornton leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, can you explain?" Eleanor had a different voice, a different way of carrying herself. "This woman looks like her, I'll grant you. But that's where the similarity ends." Carter half rose from his chair. "You're lying." "Sit down, Mr. Harrison," the judge said. Cole continued, "I think Carter wants so badly to believe she's Eleanor that he's convinced himself. But I can't stand by and watch him build his life on a lie." Thornton nodded. "No further questions." Sheriff Hayes stood to cross-examine. "Mr. Brennan, isn't it true that you and Mr. Harrison had a dispute over water rights 2 years ago? That's got nothing to do with this. Doesn't it? Didn't you lose that dispute? Didn't it cost you almost everything?" Cole's face reddened. "I said it's got nothing to do with this. I think it has everything to do with it. I think you're lying out of spite." "I'm not lying." "Then answer me this. If you knew she wasn't Eleanor, why didn't you say something sooner? Why wait until now?" Cole had no answer. Hayes sat down. Then Carter stood. "I'd like to call a witness," he said. "Who?" Judge Miller asked. "My son." Tommy walked to the front of the courtroom, small and serious in his Sunday clothes. He climbed into the witness chair and looked at the judge. "Son," Judge Miller said gently, "do you know what it means to tell the truth?" "Yes, sir." "Then I want you to tell this court. Do you believe that woman is your mother?" Tommy looked at Eleanor. "I know she is." "How do you know, Harn?" "Because she sings my song, the one only she and I know. And because when I'm scared, she makes me feel safe. And because my heart knows her even when my head doesn't understand." Thornton stood. "Your Honor, the boy is 7 years old. He can't possibly make such a determination." "I can determine my own mother," Tommy said, his voice clear and strong. Carter stood again. "I'd like to call one more witness." "Who?" "Not who, what?" 20 minutes later, Shadow was led into the courthouse. The black stallion's hooves clattered on the wooden floor. He was nervous, ears, back, eyes rolling. Eleanor stood. She walked toward the horse, slowly holding out her hand. Shadow lifted his head and looked at her. Then he walked to her, put his nose against her palm, stood perfectly still as she stroked his neck. "This horse hasn't let anyone but me near him in 3 years, Carter said. He was wild with grief after Eleanor disappeared. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't work. But the moment he saw her in Sweetwater, he knew her. Animals don't lie, Your Honor. They don't have reasons to pretend. They just know." Judge Miller watched the horse and the woman. A long silence filled the courtroom. Finally, he spoke. "Mr. Brennan, you're excused. And if I ever see you in my courtroom committing perjury again, I'll have you jailed." Cole left red-faced and furious. The judge turned to Dr. Blackwell. "Doctor, you examined this woman. Did you find any evidence that she poses a danger to herself or others?" "No, Your Honor, but her mental state is compromised. Compromised by trauma, not insanity. I've seen plenty of soldiers come back from war with gaps in their memory. That doesn't make them unfit for life." He looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Harrison, do you want to stay with your family?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Then that's where you'll stay. Case dismissed." The gavel came down. The courtroom erupted in applause and angry shouts in equal measure. Thornton gathered his papers in fury. Dr. Blackwell left without a word. Eleanor turned to Carter, her eyes wide with disbelief. "It's over. It's over." She collapsed into his arms, crying. Tommy ran to them, and they held each other, the three of them, as the courtroom slowly emptied around them. Outside the town of Sweetwater waited. Some people nodded in approval. Others turned away disapproving. But Martha Cooper stepped forward and hugged Eleanor. "Welcome home," she said. Reverend Miller shook Carter's hand. "I'm sorry, Carter. We should have done better by her. By both of you." They rode home as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Eleanor rode Shadow, Carter rode beside her, and Tommy sat in front of his father. When the ranch came into view, Eleanor stopped her horse and stared. "What's wrong?" Carter asked. Nothing. I just wanted to look at it, to really see it. My home. They rode into the yard. The ranch hands had gathered waiting. When they saw Eleanor, they removed their hats and bowed their heads in respect. Jack stepped forward. Mrs. Harrison, welcome back. Truly. Eleanor smiled, and it was the first real smile Carter had seen on her face since before the river took her. That night after Tommy was asleep, Carter and Eleanor sat on the porch. The stars were bright overhead, the air cool and sweet. I'm still afraid, Eleanor said, that I'll wake up and this will all be a dream. It's not a dream. How do you know? Because dreams don't hurt this much or feel this good. She looked at him. I don't remember falling in love with you the first time. Carter's chest tightened. That's all right. But I think I'm falling in love with you now, with the man you are today, the man who fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. Carter took her hand. I lost you once. I won't lose you again. You won't have to. They sat in silence, hands joined watching the stars wheel overhead. 6 months passed. Summer turned to autumn, autumn to winter. Snow fell on the mountains and the valley went white and still. Eleanor's memories continued to return in pieces, but the gaps no longer frightened her. She was not the woman she had been before the river. She was someone new, forged by survival and loss and the slow, patient work of rebuilding. She taught Tommy to bake bread. She worked alongside the ranch hands, earning their respect through labor and skill. She rode Shadow through the valley, relearning the land that had once been as familiar as her own skin. And slowly, carefully, she and Carter rebuilt what the river had destroyed. One evening in early spring, Eleanor asked, "Can we go to the river?" Carter looked at her in surprise. Are you sure? I need to face it, really face it. They rode there together, the three of them, as the last light faded from the sky. They stood on the bank where Eleanor had disappeared, where Carter had searched in vain, where Tommy had cried for his mother. Eleanor held the old rag doll, the one she had carried through her years of wandering. She looked at it for a longer moment, then knelt and placed it gently in the water. What are you doing? Tommy asked. Letting go, Eleanor said. This doll kept me alive when I had nothing. It was my only friend, but I don't need it anymore. I have you. I have your father. I have everything. They watched the doll float downstream, carried by the current, until it disappeared into the darkness. The river took so much from us, Eleanor said, but it gave me back too. Broken maybe, changed, but alive. Carter put his arm around her. Not broken, tempered, like steel. Tommy leaned against his mother. Are you happy now, Ma? Eleanor smiled. Yes, sweetheart, I am. They stood together as night fell, as the stars appeared one by one, as the river flowed endlessly past, carrying the old grief away and leaving only the promise of tomorrow. The river had taken Eleanor Harrison, and the river had given her back. Not the same, not unchanged, but home, and that was enough.